Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tim Bowling. I'm the chairman of BAPEN, and I would like to welcome you all to Harrogate and to our conference. So this is our 21st birthday, and we will celebrate it in great style this evening, but in more sober style now. And I just wanted to spend 10-15 minutes doing a bit of backward-looking and also forward-looking as to what we've achieved and where the challenges lie for the future. So let me take you back to 1992, where this all began. And what happened was that there was a recognition that nutrition really, no one was really taking responsibility for it. The King's Fund commissioned a report, a positive approach to nutrition as treatment. And it was that report that recommended the formation of a multidisciplinary group to set standards for care, for training, and to be an expert forum for clinicians, for government, industry, and to coordinate research. And that's where BAPEN was born. BAPEN was that multidisciplinary group. And the Working Party, in essence, became the first BAPEN Council and chaired by Professor John Leonard-Jones. And this is a photograph of the first BAPEN Council, and many of these folk you perhaps won't recognize. I'm afraid the guys have not aged as well as the girls. But notably, front center, you'll see someone that has hardly changed in the last 21 years. So congratulations with great jealousy to Christine Russell. And I'd also just like to point out the Bucks Fizz member at the end of that front row, Carolyn Wheatley, in her very fashionable of the day hairdo. Since John Leonard-Jones's chairmanship, there have been 5 chairmen up until myself, David Silk, Chris Pennington, Alistair Forbes, Marinos Elia, and Mike Stroud. And I'm delighted that David, Alistair, Marinos, and Mike are here. John Leonard-Jones sadly couldn't make it and sends his apologies, and many of you will be aware that Chris tragically died while in office. So Chris and David, always fondly in our memories and our gratitude. So what have we achieved in the last 21 years? Well, in your delegate bags, there is a little brochure that we've pulled together for the event, which sets out many, but not all, of BAPEN's achievements. And not just BAPEN, some of the key achievements from our core groups, and also some other activities not necessarily related directly to BAPEN, but stimulated by the work that BAPEN was doing. So I'm not going to rehash any of that, but do have a look through it. It gives a good insight as to what we are all about. But in essence, we are unique in that we are a multi-professional association made up of all the relevant professional core groups and patients, and as such have been in a very strong position to champion good nutritional care and drive up standards, which we most surely have. We've also been able to point out the wider implications of malnutrition in both hospital and the community. We've developed and will always continue to develop educational materials. We are kind of moving rapidly into the 21st century with a lot more e-learning opportunities. We've also produced a lot of important reports looking at epidemiological and demographic and financial data relating to nutrition. Must be our crown jewel, for which we, and especially Marinos Elia, can take great personal pride from that. It is a huge success. It's now been translated into 5 languages and is certainly gone global. I think there is no doubt that we have maneuvered ourselves into a position of being a real opinion leader, and certainly our opinions are sought from the highest levels down on most matters relating to nutrition. Our collaboration with our industry partners, I think, has also been a great success, to great mutual benefit and collaboration for both sides, and also great friendship as well. And increasingly in the current NHS, with commissioning kind of coming up so much in the fast track, we've set up a new committee within BAPEN called the Quality Group, which is driving forward a lot of work on quality aspects, and some of that you'll hear in the symposium that follows. So, you know, our roots were much more focused on in-hospital enteral parenteral nutritional support, and within the sort of the requirements of the nutrition support team type of individuals. But we have gone a long way from those early roots, and have done very well. But there is absolutely no room for complacency, and there are many challenges that are on our desks at the moment and will continue to be on our desks, I'm quite sure, for a while to come. And in short, this is where I see us needing to move forward in. Now, a lot of you at the coalface might not see the direct relevance of some of us wandering around the corridors of power and having discussions with NHS England and CQC and so forth. But I would suggest that if we don't get nutrition firmly embedded, then there will be implications for all of us in terms of jobs and budgets and so forth. So it might not be of direct relevance to you, but I think important indirectly to every one of us. But our raison d'etre is you lot, is our membership. And we forget that at our peril. We have got to make sure that you are our number one focus at all times. And that means delivering activities that will make you want to become members, that will make you want to stay members, and will allow us to expand our membership. I think it's lovely coming to conference and spending a couple of days away and learning and educating and having a bit of a social and meeting up with old friends and colleagues. But I think we all recognise it is becoming increasingly difficult to get away from our base hospitals and base employers, both in terms of being allowed away and also the finances to come away. So I think to attract and retain membership, we have got to expand our local activities, local meetings, local networks, to really foster a much healthier and thriving membership. And in that regard, I am going to now make a plug. There is I think, fairly reasonable perception amongst many of you that the folk that troop up onto the stage here are the same old faces year in, year out. And to a certain extent that is true, because it's the same old faces that volunteer in. But we really do want new faces. And I know it's probably in a lot of people's nature not to stick their head above the parapet, but I really would like to ask you to do so. In whatever way, however big or small you feel you can contribute, either to the local activities or kind of more national and committee activities. So there is a giant map on the BAPEN stand. I couldn't cut and paste it into my presentation to show you. And there are colour-coded cards for the different professional groups. And we want you all to write down your name and contact details and stick your little card into the relevant part of the map. As I came in here, mine was the only one in the map, and I hope after the next coffee break there'll be many more. And that will allow us to see where geographically everyone is based, and will allow us some kind of ability to contact you to ask if you're prepared to kind of pitch in some way. The other plug is a meeting planned for the 27th of February, because we want to brainstorm how we are going to structure our local and regional activities. And obviously the regional reps have been invited. I've sent a personal letter out to all the membership. Obviously, many of you are not actual members, so you won't have got that letter. But the 27th of February is an opportunity for all of us to try and shape how we run the show at the regional and local level in the future. So we're happy to cover travel expenses, and I would urge you all, please, to come along, but to let the BAPEN office know in advance. And the final thing on the membership is that people, the dinosaurs like me, are gradually being eased out, who don't even understand Twitter and Facebook. And we need to embrace, of course, all the new social media and the opportunities that gives us. So we need to educate, and not just educating you in forums like this or local meetings, but we need to educate the uninitiated, the cynics, the people who don't believe in the benefits of nutrition. And part of that has to be us being able to actually show and demonstrate that there is benefit. And that's where nutrition has often struggled, because the evidence base is kind of quite weak in a lot of areas. So outcomes, which you're going to hear a lot more about in a moment, is an increasing focus of activity to look at how we can measure outcomes in a meaningful and clinically relevant way, so that we can go to colleagues in our hospitals and demonstrate and show that what we're doing is worthwhile. So we need to educate, but also within the limitations of the NHS and what the NHS and the Trust will allow us to do. And obviously part of that's going to be increasingly e-learning and activities where you don't need to come away from base. BAPEN now increasingly has a focus on prevention, which clearly is going to have more of a community focus, and that means dragging the reluctant general practitioner into the teaching room and trying to get them to see the light, which I think is going to be one of the biggest challenges. Self-screening is something that we are exploring at the moment to really kind of improve and increase the public profile as well. Research has taken really quite a kind of a nosedive as far as BAPEN's concerned in recent years. When it all kicked off 21 years ago, there's a lot more science, a lot more activity, a lot more scientists engaged and involved in the association. And for all sorts of different reasons, that has really kind of plummeted, in part because many of us clinicians are NHS rather than academic. It's difficult to get time to do proper research, and it's certainly difficult to get decent amounts of money to conduct that research. But nevertheless, there must be ways to re-engage and reinvigorate, and I think that has to be a kind of a strategic aim over the next 5 to 10 years. BAPEN has to respond to the changing healthcare environment. It obviously changes on a regular basis, at least every 5 years, and I'm no doubt there'll be more changes after the next election. Having an inside track as to what's happening in the political corridors of power is very helpful, but it does mean that we need to be flexible and to adapt as required. And of course, like any association, maintaining financial viability is always going to be a challenge. So those, in a nutshell, are where I see our big areas of challenge, and as I said at the beginning of this slide, really looking at the membership to help us to achieve what we want to achieve. So what about BAPEN in 2034? So let's just, in a more light-hearted way, cast our mind ahead 21 years to see where we might be. So of course we'll have King William V. Wales and Northern Ireland will have followed Scotland to independence in 2026 and will have removed themselves from BAPEN. The government will be a Conservative BNP coalition under the Prime Ministership of David Beckham, and they will have decommissioned the NHS in its entirety, which means that all hospitals will be privately owned. It's bad news for gastroenterologists. Since the abandonment of endoscopy in 2030 in favour of self-propelling capsule technology, gastroenterology is no longer a recognised specialty. The outpatients are taken over by psychiatrists, and the default clinical specialty for nutrition is the interventional radiologist. Nurses, it's bad news. Because they're privately owned hospitals, all direct inpatient care will be provided by care assistants on the minimum wage. And the single-handed regional nutrition nurse specialist will be advising those care assistants remotely with CCTV and webcams, and spend her time filling out incident forms, which is a much cheaper way of conducting business. Hand scanners for all patients will read body water, macro and micronutrient requirements, and the software will prescribe appropriate feeding regimes, which will mean that dietitians for nutritional support are no longer required. And for the pharmacists, the PN companies finally decide to talk to each other and to develop several single enormous compounding facilities for all in and outpatient PN, which means that pharmacist involvement in PN is also no longer required. And in the community, a newly formed community nutrition police will go around incarcerating everyone with BMIs of over 35 and less than 18 for enforced starvation and feeding. Which leaves the patient, who will have to be doing everything themselves, and they will rename themselves the Federation of Upskilled Patients, or Fed Up. And I'll look something like that. So, flippancy aside, I think BAPEN has come of age. I think we can very rightfully give ourselves a self-congratulatory pat on the back of job well done, but job also needs to continue and to continue to be well done. So on that basis, I hope you enjoy the conference here and get a lot out of it, and we'll go back to your bases infused and reinvigorated. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we need to kind of get a bit more serious. None of you will not recognize the term of the Francis report and the Berwick report, which is the government's response to what happened at Mid-Staffs. And clearly there are a lot of implications for all of that on nutrition, and we're going to spend the rest of the symposium really kind of looking at that because it really is important stuff and relevant to every single one of us. So I'm now going to hand over to Ailsa to take over the chair for the rest of the symposium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm not quite sure how I follow that, other than to say that really the future of nutrition is really ours to imagine, it's ours to plan, it's ours to build, and it's ours to deliver. And I think really in this next session, we would like to think about how we do that, and then really work with all of you to actually implement what we do at a regional and a local level. So jokes aside, I dread to think what I will look like in 21 years' time, so I'm really grateful for Tim not having that on his slides. But what I wanted to do was to really walk through the initiatives and the opportunities that I think we've got that are ours for the taking. At the end of my presentation, will then outline this session. But for those of you that have looked at the programme, you will see that we have a number of speakers from each of the home countries. So really my job is to focus on England, but also to set the scene for what we're going to do. So in terms of where we start this walkthrough, I would really like to start with thinking about Francis and Berwick. Now, I can't imagine there's anybody in this audience who hasn't heard, seen, written, read about the Francis report. But can I just have a show of hands for the people that have read the Berwick report? Okay, that's probably about 10% of you. And really, the Francis report was an absolute, really, really important inquiry and a great report, but actually 1,782 pages with 290 recommendations. I was personally extremely disappointed when Francis thought it was the right thing to publish 290 recommendations, because how on earth do you start to prioritise from the 290? And actually nutrition was around 270, so it was quite a way down that list. But I was absolutely inspired by the work of Don Berwick, who led a committee. Some of your colleagues, or in fact some of you may have been on that committee. And actually what they did was they turned the 290 recommendations into 8 themes that we need to focus on in healthcare to really improve and make sure that we don't have another mid-staffs. And in this session this morning, what we have done is we've thought about which of those are most relevant to nutrition. If we had longer, it would be really good to look at all 8. And maybe at future BAPEN conferences, those of you that do get involved in the regional activity will actually choose to look at some of the others. I think it would have been really good to look at staff and to look at training capacity and building, but we just don't have time to focus on all of them. So what we have done is we've focused on leadership, patient and public involvement, and measurement and transparency. And you'll see from the programme that once I've set the scene in terms of what we want to do, we have our colleagues from the home countries who are going to share with us what's happening on leadership, patient and public involvement and measures in each of the home countries. And we've also got some experts at the table. So the first expert we've got is Steve, who is the PINT Secretary. Many of you will know Steve, and I think Steve's voice is the most important voice on this stage this morning. So if you want to switch off now, but make sure that you listen to what Steve's got to say. And secondly, I think the other thing that's important is actually the measurement, because my personal belief is that the one thing we just haven't tackled in nutrition is how to measure. So because we have no measures that we're all using, then we are not able to demonstrate the extent of the challenge and the extent of the variation between one organisation and another. So really the Berwick report is called A Promise to Learn, a Commitment to Act. And actually what we would very much like to do is to work with you over the next 2 days to really be able to articulate what BAPEN's commitment to action is. So not about presenting at conferences, but actually what are we all going to do together when we get back to our workplace on Thursday. So really, NHS England, and I'm now just going to talk about England because we haven't invited a separate speaker for England, but NHS England are currently holding some early discussions to actually look at how, at a national level, they can support the improvement of nutrition. And interestingly, they've done some work that's really quite important around looking at the complexity of nutritional care and trying to understand why, despite a plethora of guidelines and people like you and I working on it extremely hard for the last 21 years, we still have an awful lot of progress to make. So NHS England have recently confirmed to us in BAPEN that they are really keen to explore the development and implementation of a national nutrition strategy. And BAPEN Quality Group with Nutrition and Hydration Action Alliance partners have been working on that. They're also keen to develop a national set of measures, and Kate's going to explain to you our early thinking, but we want all of you to get involved in the testing of that work. And we've had some early discussions about setting up a national nutrition board. And the benefit of NHS England doing that is that they can then communicate the message to all of the commissioning support units and the clinical commissioning groups. But as Tim's already said, this will only work if we have very active regional networks for BAPEN. So please do, over the coffee break, put your name on a card and attach it to our map. But in terms of what's going to, well, I think I've just said that, in terms of what's going to actually make a difference is going to be the action. And really what we want to do is to align all the national work at a regional level. And I think one of the opportunities for us to do this, and some of you may have seen the announcement very recently, NHS England have approved the delivery of patient safety collaboratives at a regional level. Now, when I say regional level, they've approved it for the new academic health science network level, and I think there's a really good opportunity for us to make sure that nutrition is embedded in that work. So what I'd like all of you to do is to find out who are your contacts at the local academic health science network, and to actually see if you can influence them to make sure that nutrition and hydration is part of the patient safety collaborative that they are going to be running, and it's a 5-year programme. So if we can get nutrition and hydration embedded early, then that will mean that we have a significant opportunity over 5 years. If you're not sure where or who is involved in your local academic health science network, there's a link up there. We will make this Prezi available on the BAPEN website. But there are 15 of them, and I think it's really important that we really start to engage in this work. But actually, so what? If we engage in this work, how do we really make nutritional improvements happen? Some of you may have been in the audience when I presented the work that we started from the Department of Health QUIP Safe Care programme 2 or 3 years ago. And I think we certainly made significant improvements, but actually the lasting legacy of that programme has been the NHS safety thermometer. And I think what we really need to focus on now in nutrition is having a national strategy and invest in the time to develop the measures. And what that will make sure is that if we've got a measurement system that we can all use, that is the enabler to be able to have a sequin at a national level to incentivise our organisations to deliver good nutritional care. And you might be thinking, well, why does that matter? You know, why, as Tim's already said, does it really matter that we get the policy right? And it does, and the reason it matters is actually as soon as you have a national sequin, it focuses the mind of every chief executive and their trust board in the organisations right across the country, so right across the UK. And actually, if we can do that, then we do know that we will be able to understand where we have really good nutritional care and where we have some negative outliers where you may want to do some improvement. So in terms of the work that BAPEN Quality Group have been doing recently, I just wanted to really set the scene for what we've been working on. I think when we talk about measures, I mean, certainly I've spent the last 2 years really sort of being quite switched off by the opportunities for measurement, because I think of measurement as measurement for performance. All of you working in healthcare will be very familiar with the vast array of measures that we collect that we never see again. They don't make any difference to patient care. We're not often able to use them in a meaningful way. They just feed the beast and go into a big black hole. We have very recently, I think, in the NHS discovered a different way to use measures and measurement that is focused around how we produce a dashboard that we track our own improvement over time. So this is really what we're interested in. It's not about being able to benchmark and compare one organisation to another, although you can never stop people doing that, and there is some interest in that. What actually really matters is where we are able to track our own care over time. And some of you, as I've already said, may be very familiar with the NHS safety thermometer. We are very keen to develop something for nutrition. We are interested potentially in calling it a care thermometer, but we would really like your feedback on whether that's the right thing to do and whether you would like to get involved in testing it. But we know that a set of measures and a strategy alone won't be enough. So the other thing that we are working on is developing a campaign. And we know that the best campaigns in healthcare are actually delivered when we have a simple message and it's the same message right across the system. So hand washing is a great example. If we can do something similar for nutrition, then we should be in a really good position. And finally, we think we need to develop a very strong call to action. So the other thing that we are doing is launching a guide for consultation at this conference, and I would urge all of you to have a look at the guide and actually tell us whether we've got the right things in it. The way we've structured the guide is to ask, we've recommended 3 top priorities for each part of the NHS system and the social care system. So what we'd like to know is whether we've got the right priorities. So if we could have your feedback by the end of the year, then we can actually launch that next year. But I would also ask you to do some things differently. So one of the things I would ask you all to do is to think about where you focus your attention in acute care or in the organisations you work, and to really start to think about how you can educate your senior executive teams who are making the decision. And I've had a red flashing light now for some time, so I'm just going to skip through this and actually just finish by saying I think it's really important that we build a strong coalition of partners. We cannot do this alone as BAPEN. There are lots of organisations already working on this, and if we come together and all get behind it, then we should be able to make a significant difference. But I do think what's really important for all of us is that we actually commit to act, and we commit to act for the right reasons. And actually, before we hear from Steve, I just want to play this video. Apologies for the fact that it's American, but I think this will hopefully just set the scene for what we need to think about and the reasons why we're doing this work before we move on to the rest of the session. So I now ask you all to listen to Steve's story with a new set of eyes and ears to really understand what it feels like to be Steve. Thank you, Steve.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know how on earth I'm supposed to follow that video. Slightly choked up by it, never mind. Oh, yes, I will.
Press the button, sorry.
Thank you. No, it's all right. Obviously, as you all know, the NHS has been around for a long time. It's undergone numerous restructurings, and probably none more so complex as what happens most recently. It's always been the objective, from a patient's perspective, that healthcare is a human right to have this access, and that the healthcare should be efficient and effective in however it's delivered. But it seems as if that it's only now that all parts of the NHS are actually beginning to sing from the same song sheet, as it were. And by this I mean that the patient voice is being acknowledged and their wishes and opinions are being encouraged and then acted upon. It is really tragic that the shift has come about as a result of such tragedies as those in Staffordshire. And as Francis highlights, these events should have been avoided and it's hoped will never happen again. But as a patient or service user, hearing of such events is a grave concern and can impact the confidence that we have in our healthcare professionals, on whom really we are quite reliant. It's therefore a great comfort to see that things are actually starting to change. And as Berwick's report on patient safety shows, one of his main recommendations is around patient and public involvement. He says that the patient voice should be heard and heeded at all times. The report explains that this shouldn't be a token gesture, that it should be found at all service levels, from the front line to the interface between patient and clinician, the organisational level, the community level and the national level. As a patient myself who frequently interacts with different healthcare professionals across a number of different settings, to know that I'm able to express an opinion and have that opinion listened to and valued makes my interaction far more powerful. It increases my confidence in my healthcare team and the treatment they prescribe. This confidence is invaluable, not only from a patient safety point of view, as stated in the Berwick report, but also to my compliance and my faith in the treatment. As patients, it's very encouraging to see that the passive patient is something that is now seen to impede engagement with treatment. In general, if patients are given the information and the options available, then they can feel involved in their care. This gives them a sense of ownership and confidence. It can remove the feeling of this is what was done to me and replace it with this is what was done for me. And I can testify that that is a huge difference. As I said, the recommendation is for the patient voice to be heard at all levels. These include NHS staff, organisations, commissioners and providers, and of course the government. This has to be something that's given real attention to. Unless all of these levels are listening to and involving the patient as more than just an end user, then the full potential of patient involvement wouldn't be achieved, and the NHS would continue to be at risk of failing its patients. As a patient and patient advocate, I really hope that these recommendations become a reality across all NHS levels. I would like to quickly share a few quotes that I came across when researching the Berwick report that I think demonstrate how the different levels of the NHS appear to be viewing such reports. At the government level, Secretary for State Jeremy Hunt, this is a fantastic report from a world-renowned expert on patient safety. It's a strong endorsement of all the government has delivered since Francis itself, including transparency and putting the patient first. It's so encouraging for a patient to hear that at the level of government, they acknowledge the potential for us, the patient, to improve the NHS and prevent the tragedies highlighted in Francis. At an organisational level, Dr. Mike Durkin, NHS England Director of Patient Safety, commented, Don Berwick's report contains a number of actions that everyone in the NHS can implement immediately, building on the improvements we've already started to make in order to improve how we listen to patients. The fact that Dr. Durkin acknowledges that these changes can be implemented immediately is so encouraging. So often we hear about potential changes and improvements, but it takes 3 or 4 years before they actually do anything about it. Finally, Chief Nursing Officer Jane Cummings. NHS England welcomes the focus on growing a culture which puts the patient first, engages and empowers patients and carers, supports transparency and learning, and takes responsibility for poor care. I couldn't sum up any better what we as patients want. Hear our voices, listen to what we have to say, help us to help you. So far I've talked an awful lot about the NHS, its healthcare professionals, the organisational bodies, and what they need to do to be considering in order to value their patients and build a relationship with us. But as patients, we acknowledge that we too have a big role to play if this is to become a reality and be effective. It's brilliant to see that Berwick recognised this. And as Ailsa mentioned before, one of his main points was a list of 5 key action points on how patients and carers can become involved in their care if they wish to. As a patient advocate, I feel obviously all 5 of these are really important, but one stands out as being key, and that is to achieve mutual respect, trust and honesty. If this can be achieved, then the other action points are more likely to become a reality, namely the sharing of goals and treatment, speaking up when parents and carers feel things aren't going right, or when they see something that they feel is unsafe. It's interesting to read that Berwick states, patients should, when they wish, advise leaders and managers by offering their expert advice on how things are going, how to improve and how to meet the needs of the patient. Now obviously many patients have little knowledge of the healthcare system and of medicine, and to be honest, we kind of don't really want to know that much anyways. But what we do as patients have is hands-on experience, insider information about treatment and services. We are the ones who use it on a daily basis. Within Pint, our members often spend the majority of the day following a very specific plan and being controlled by the demands of their treatment. But in doing so, we learn and develop skills and techniques which become personal and invaluable to us, in helping us to deal every day with this treatment and not letting it rule our lives. This learning on a daily basis and these insights into the practicalities are so important to how we live. An important flip side, of course, is that when we are engaging in our treatment, we can see firsthand where issues can arise, some of which could obviously lead to adverse reactions and be quite dangerous. These could be missed unless you're actually as involved in the treatment as the patient is. And the experience that we have can not only be beneficial to ourselves, but to other patients as well. Without a partnership between patients and the NHS as a whole, the insights from patients would be lost, and the potential issues and risks would remain in the system. I, for one, as I'm sure you all do, would like to make things as safe and effective as can possibly be. For a long time at the beginning of my treatment, I felt I didn't have a say in what my treatment plan was, and I simply did as I was told. The objections were never really explained, and when things didn't go as expected or hoped, I always felt I had failed, and that my healthcare team were becoming frustrated and irritated by my failure. The result was that I had no relationship between myself and my team, and I feel my treatment suffered as a result. It was only when I became more involved in my care did I begin to develop the trust, respect and honesty that Berwick describes. Then I began to make progress. Being involved with the decisions and having my own opinions listened to and considered gave me the confidence and faith in my own ability to follow my treatment plan effectively. Berwick made another powerful statement when he stated that the healthcare system should help the NHS move away from asking what's the matter to what matters to you. This would of course require the healthcare professionals to begin partnering up with patients, but you need to remember that patients need guidance to develop these skills. As healthcare professionals, you're all in a position to make this a reality now, in everyday practice, and as a patient I would urge you to do so. If you can involve me in my care, then I can feel empowered to take more responsibility for it. To quickly sum up, the patient voice can provide a unique insight into what an effective and efficient service would look like. We acknowledge that we have a role to play in this, but with your help, but we need your help, not only to be given the chance to be heard, but also to be given the skills and confidence to speak up. We're all striving for the same thing: effective and safe treatment to be delivered in an efficient manner. Please help us to help you to help us. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much. It is extremely nerve-wracking to stand on this platform, so thank you very much. That was just exactly, I think, what we as health professionals need to hear. And actually, for all of us in the room, it's actually down to us to make the difference. The reports are very good, but it's actually how we make sure that we implement the recommendations that will really take us to a different place. What I would like to do now is to introduce the remainder of our speakers all in one go, so that it runs very smoothly and it's not interrupted by my introductions. So I'm delighted that we've got Sarah Jane Hughes, who's going to speak first, telling us really what's happening in Northern Ireland around placing patients at the centre of care. We unfortunately don't have Pete Murphy with us. Pete unfortunately is poorly today, but we do have Dr Alistair McKinley, who's going to talk to us about what's happening from a leadership perspective in Scotland, and then we're going to finish the session by focusing on measures. So I really want to thank Judith, because Judith Jenkins took the hardest challenge after Steve's, which was to really look at what we are doing around measures at a service level in Wales, and then we are finishing with Kate Chima, who's going to really talk to us about what the opportunities are for designing a new measurement system that we can all use. So could I ask you, Sarah Jane, to come up? Thank you.
Thank you, Ilse. So I'm just going to give some examples this morning of Northern Ireland's response to these inquiries. It's really in the very early stages, and to give some examples of how some projects within Northern Ireland are aiming to engage with patients and empower patients to take some part in the move forward. So what has happened in Northern Ireland is that the Public Accounts Committee of the Northern Ireland Assembly, based at Stormont, issued a report on the safety of services provided by the Health and Social Care Trusts in Northern Ireland following the Francis inquiry in February 2013. They made a number of recommendations that you've already heard about this morning in respect to leadership and measurement, and what I'm going to focus on now is in relation to engaging with patients and clients. Recommendation 10, which I have picked out of their report, says that the recipients of health and social care services must be assured that their views on the safety and quality of the services they receive are important. The committee recommends that trusts become more proactive in obtaining feedback on the services that they provide, encouraging patients and clients to identify areas for potential improvement or to highlight good practice. Not for us to identify areas, but for patients and clients to identify areas for improvement, and also to identify good practice. Looking at the model that many of you here in this room will be familiar with, I thought I'd start with the many, coming down to the few. So in 2011, Northern Ireland launched a regional strategy for promoting good nutrition, which I have spoken about in this stage before. It aimed to provide information and strategy regarding the prevention, identification and management of malnutrition in all settings. And one of the outcomes of this promoting good nutrition support strategy was to engage with patients, and it proposed that a nutrition coalition was formed. This nutrition coalition, the Patient Client Council, invited a wide range of individuals to set it up. It had a very, very wide reach. They invited disease-specific groups, Crohn's, colitis, all the usual players, anorexia nervosa support groups, but also things like church groups, luncheon clubs, those who would not primarily be regarded as patient groups, but that are at the coalface of preventing and providing nutrition in the community, and also obesity groups, etc. as well. The first meeting took place just in September past there, and that's the Crumlin Road Jail, which now has become Belfast's latest tourist attraction. So not only can you go for a tour, but also that's where the Nutrition Coalition met. And they served all sorts of things like prison fare for lunch, etc., etc. So the aim of this Nutrition Coalition was to come up with a strategy to reach not only those with chronic illnesses who may already be known to the healthcare system, but also vulnerable, unknown individuals, those who perhaps are slipping through the net. And what is happening in this group is the clients themselves are to form working groups to come up with ideas for individuals to engage, as Steve has mentioned already, in relation to their nutritional status and treatment. One of the proposed measures is the self-screening, know your own score. So it's not about screening in known healthcare settings or GPs or nursing homes, but that every single patient or client will have access to their own score and that they will carry that with them wherever they go. Also setting up a food forum and chat rooms using social media to try and engage with individuals who perhaps are normally not engaged in the process. So that's where the Nutrition Coalition has gotten to, and is trying to come up with a wide spectrum of reach for nutrition in Northern Ireland. One area that I'd like to look at in terms of a patient-centred area that was identifying areas for potential improvement is a home enteral tube feeding survey that took place, a patient satisfaction survey that took place in Belfast. Following liaison with the BANS committee, they adopted a draft BANS patient satisfaction survey that had been taken place through SurveyMonkey, involved users and completed a small pilot. It was just a small survey, 20 patients that had been discharged within the previous year in the Belfast Trust, 16 to their own home, 3 to a nursing home and 1 to a residential home. And some of the results I think you'll find interesting. One of the key results was around decision making, around tube placement. Only 16 patients felt that they were able to complete this area of the questionnaire. 16 patients said yes, they'd had discussion with all the various members of the MDT. 14 included the top dog, the consultant, but all of those 16 patients reported that they felt that they had no choice, that the decision was taken out of their hands, that this was a last resort, that they were having a tube place, and they felt that it was out of their control. And I think that's a very, very key message that we as healthcare professionals need to take on board. We need to engage with our patients. We need to make them feel that this is the right way forward, whatever way that we can to try and include our patient groups in the decision-making process. We looked at support post-discharge, and initially from a patient perspective it looked very good. 100% of patients had healthcare professional contact with them after discharge, district nurse, dietitian, nursing home staff, carers. 95% felt well supported by their MDT, and 95% of the patients felt that they knew what to do or who to contact if problems became evident. And we were looking like we were meeting all the recommendations of CREST, which is the Northern Ireland Guidelines for Enteral Feeding, and the NICE guidelines in 2006. However, 70% of these patients made emergency contact with a healthcare professional with tube-related problems in the last 6 months. 30% of these patients attended A&E, and there was tube-related problems a total of 15 times in this 20-patient group. Of the 15 visits to A&E, 5 hospital admissions were made with tube-related problems. So quite obviously, we were not doing as good a job as we thought we were. So what was going wrong? Well, when we looked at it, vital information was lacking or inconsistent. There was poor information about unblocking of tubes, what steps to take if the tube was dislodged. There was poor information about the type, size, make and tube of which was placed. And information was missing about when a planned review or change of the tube, or who would be responsible for this, was missing as well. So we then looked for an example of good practice. Who was doing this better? There's been a very nice project that's taken place in the Southern Trust in Northern Ireland. Home enteral tube feeding coordinator was appointed, which acted as a bridge from hospital to community. She has undertaken monthly training sessions as recommended by the guidelines. She trained 260 staff in the last 16 months. She introduced a day clinic where NG tube changes, and also new discharge arrangements put in place, including the introduction of a going home kit. Averted emergency attendances for the patient, saving a hospital attendance, but also saving money as well. When the patients and carers were then surveyed, they felt empowered to self-manage their condition. They felt that they were more in control. Patients and carers then involved in a focus group reported increased confidence and greater satisfaction with the healthcare professionals caring for them, and there was reduced stress and anxiety as they knew exactly who to contact if they had a tube-related problem. One small example of patient care in terms of small numbers is the movement of colorectal surgery and intestinal failure from the Royal Victoria Hospital within the Belfast Trust to Belfast City Hospital just in October past. Our patient group are extremely anxious in regards to this move of both their inpatient and their outpatient service. And as an IF team, we tried to engage with patient focus group and enable these patients to address trust management with their concerns, objections and uncertainties around the move. We wrote to all of our 160 patients to explain the rationale, the time frame, and to give reassurance that there would be no change in IF personnel. We've provided each of our patients with a boarding card and a letter stating that they were under the IF team to be shown at admission to A&E or the emergency surgical unit, because this was a change to their normal admission pattern. We developed an admissions pathway for patients and included a unique patient identifier code for intestinal failure to flag at A&E, and provided each patient with an interim list of contact details for team members to be followed up with a permanent contact list when all was settled. This is just an example for a small patient group of how engaging with the group is very important. And I just want to finish by giving an example of one of this patient group. One of my patients, and she's given her permission for her details to be used today, is called Phoebe. She was diagnosed with Crohn's in the 1980s. She had multiple resections during that time and ended up with 130 centimetres of small bowel. When she first came to be referred to the nutrition support team in the Royal Victoria Hospital in 1997, she was 40 kilograms with a BMI of 14. She had been housebound for 16 years. She had gone from bed to toilet and back again and had never left the house. She missed out on her own children growing up. People used to pass her in the street if she ever went out, and usually that was only to hospital appointments, because they thought that she was dying. She said she was alive, but she certainly was not living. After nutritional intervention and under the care of the nutrition support team based in the Belfast Trust, she's now 66 years old. She's a grandma. She travels extensively. These days, the only time I ever hear from Phoebe, apart from outpatient appointments, is to tell me where she's going on her next holiday. She has now fostered hundreds of children, and when I spoke to her in terms of describing her experience, she said nutrition has given her back her life. I think, in summary, in terms of our response to Frances and Berwick, there should never be another Phoebe. There should never be another patient who is housebound, who gets to a BMI of 14, and that we won't be able to do anything about it. Thank you.
Leadership is always necessary. When times are hard, it's essential. But when times are uncertain, it needs to be visionary. Scotland hasn't had a mid-staffs. We've had lots of disgraces and concerns. How have we avoided this? That's a big chunk. The NHS in Scotland is fully devolved. It's a smaller health service. It's been lighter on its feet and it's been proactive. And it has a different quality regulator and until now has had a different philosophy, which has been working with the service rather than simply inspecting. But we still have our problems, and we have an outstanding public inquiry around Vale of Leven, hospital-acquired infection, which may yet be our mid-staffs. I'm going to present you the personal desert island discs of nutritional care in Scotland, the journey we've undertaken. And my first record is It's a Kind of Magic by Queen. 2001 was a very good year for us. Chris Pennington had the vision to set up the Managed Clinical Network, and very quietly at the end of that year, a group started working on nutritional care standards for food, fluid, and nutritional care in hospitals, and they were published in 2003. They introduced compulsory screening for malnutrition, nutritional care groups, standards for menus, nutritionally assessed meals, and we were the first nation in Europe to go for compulsory standards. My second record. By 2006, it was clear that things were progressing very slowly. Culture change takes time. All hospitals throughout Scotland were struggling to implement the standards. There was little progress. Quite unexpectedly, in 2007, Paul Martin, the then Chief Nursing Officer, now Dean of Health Sciences in the West of Scotland University, introduced the Improving Nutritional Care in Hospitals project. He felt that nutritional care was as essential as hospital-acquired infection in terms of patient safety. He produced nutritional champions for every health board, a learning package for junior doctors, software for the nutritional analysis of all meals, and a national nutritional catering specification for Scotland. And he put in somewhere conservatively between 1.5 million and 2 million pounds to the improvement of nutritional care. By 2010, when QIS went back to visit, there had been significant improvements in all health boards, and some health boards were scoring very highly indeed. And the second phase of the Improving Nutritional Care project had been introduced by Ros Moore, his successor, and that looked at protected meal times, the role of volunteering to help patients, discharge documentation, and nutrition in chronic conditions. The Scottish Patient Safety Programme had been introduced by the government, and there is Eric himself. And in May 2012, the figures suggested a 9.5% reduction in mortality across Scottish hospitals. I haven't heard this record, but I can guess its content. In 2011, the tide went out. QIS became Health Improvement Scotland. There were no plans to review the standards. The Improving Nutritional Care in Hospitals project was complete. It was always a time-limited project. The MCN for HPN was decommissioned by the government despite our attempts to prevent it. The Wheel of Fortune is a strange thing. In 2010, we felt we were at the top with the crown on. As 2011 went by, we lost the crown, and by the end of the year, we were hanging on by our toenails. There was no focus for professional activity on nutrition in NHS Scotland. The focus had been the network. The network no longer existed. I'm eternally grateful to BAPEN exec for allowing us to set up BAPEN Scotland. It was never an intention to set up a SAPEN. and I'm sorry this was misinterpreted by some people, but we needed a Scottish voice to approach a fully devolved Scottish government. If BAPEN had gone to Westminster and suggested that it might advise the UK government on health, I think we would have been told where to go. So to approach a government that has independence designs with a British organisation was not achieving a resonance. Independently, the Scottish Government had caught sight of mid-staffs and proactively introduced an older people in acute hospital care programme, backed up by OPAR, which is older people in acute hospitals inspections. These are announced and unannounced. They have about 5 domains, one of which is nutrition. Nutritional indicators are included in some of the visits. This includes whether wards are screening for malnutrition. It includes whether people are being helped with their meals. OPAR inspectors have intervened personally to feed patients. That doesn't go well on a front page for a chief exec. All of those headings for nutrition have been lifted directly from the Food, Fluid and Nutritional Care Standards. So we have a legacy that goes back to that original production in 2013. They keep reappearing. And Rossmore delivered what she'd promised, which was a National Nutritional Care Advisory Board. It's set up to advise the government on nutritional care, to horizon scans for new developments. It has a chair in Rossmore, the chief nurse, and also a co-chair. And that co-chair was not possible without BAPEN Scotland being recognised by our executive here. NCAB's first action was to suggest that the standards should be reviewed and that they should be extended to care homes in the community. Scotland is already integrating health and social care. They will come together in 2016 as one department. In 2013, BAPEN Scotland held its second meeting, a small meeting but very important because it absolutely unanimously endorsed a call to redo the standards. Sadly, the CQI, the clinical quality indicator for nutrition, has not been incorporated into the patient safety programme. And the reason for that is a perceived lack of viable, non-process outcomes. So the call for outcome is absolutely essential. And 2 weeks ago, Health Improvement Scotland has indicated a willingness, a definite decision, to review and extend the standards and to include complex nutritional care. Well, appropriately, the proclaimers looking out over Leith, which is where the Scottish Government has its main offices. So we have a system where governments and politicians have short-term targets. Strong professional leadership is essential because professional societies such as this have long-term aims and a long-term vision. We can play the long term. We need a strong professional voice, and that professional voice has to have a regional accent, and that applies to England as well as to the devolved nations. Devolved nations have taken a different line from Westminster, but we can learn from each other. We always have done, and we should continue to do so. Quality improvement work is cyclical. We're not back at the top. We're probably somewhere about 9 o'clock, but we're recovering. But the message has to be formulated in the appropriate language for the time, and initiatives have to be renewed. And at present, patient safety is a key agenda, and that is one of the things that we should be focusing on. I heard Sir Ian Kennedy and Francis discussing public inquiries. Sir Ian Kennedy was surprised that his inquiry, the inquiry to end all inquiries in Bristol, had to be followed 10 years later by another expensive public inquiry. The message is actually that inquiries don't work. If you're going to change a culture, you've got to change people. You've got to change the professionals, and you've got to make them listen to patients. Francis is thorough, conscientious, overlong, and in places punitive. And there is absolutely no inspiration in shame and in punishment. Flogging may still be part of Eton, but the rest of the country has given up corporal punishment a long time ago. So professional organizations need to provide inspiration and vision. And that's why I passionately support BAPEN. But if the organization loses its vision, loses its inspiration, then it is worth nothing. My final record. We need to get out there and work. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the BAPEN committee for asking me to speak on a subject that is of central concern to myself as a clinical service manager. In 10 minutes, I thought I would talk to you about the practical challenges around measurement with reference to the nutrition and dietetic services I offer at Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, and which I am sure are mirrored in health organisations around the UK. We all know that measurement is really important. We all know that nutrition underpins the efficacy of treatment and is a fundamental component of all patient pathways, irrespective of the care setting, and measurement can help us demonstrate this. So how do we go about doing this? And therein lies my problem. This slide gives you a glimpse of the range and diversity of services that my nutrition and dietetic team are delivering on behalf of the organisation. My team consists of over 100 people, of dietitians, specialist nutrition nurses, support workers, clinical managers and administrative staff. We serve a university health board that operates, as all health boards in Wales, of integrated public health, mental health, community and hospital care. We support 7 hospitals, 2,000 beds and 17 health centres, with a health board budget of over £1 billion, providing services to the immediate population of Cardiff and Vale, as well as to patients who come further afield because of the tertiary specialisms our health board provides to the whole of the South and Mid Wales area. In my day-to-day experiences, I am told I have a large dietetic service. But are these services providing quality care? Can we say if they are safe, timely, efficient, effective, equitable and person-centred? In my experience, we measure for 2 reasons: to judge and to improve. Others judge our services. For ourselves, we need to know if we are getting better at what we do. Either way, we need measurement strategies that allow us to evaluate our services and drive them forward. The default judgments are provided by the traditional performance management approaches to measurement. We are all tied into the requirements that ask us to count how many, how much, and to which specialisms and wards, and what are our waiting times, and how quick are our response times. All these have to be reported on a month-on-month basis. We can all tick that box, but I am far more interested in the measurement that can help me to demonstrate the value of what we provide, to protect my portfolio of services, and in these times the key responsibility of any service lead, as well as driving the quality of care forward. There are some aspects of my service that I find easy to measure. Structured education programmes provide us with good examples of this. Relatively small numbers of people participate in the programme, the interventions are limited to the personnel running the programme, and there is a standard defined treatment pathway with a set period for follow-up. It is a fair deduction to conclude that the results observed are directly related to the activity delivered. I'm going to show you an example of one of these, our specialist renal weight management programme called BALANCE, that we set up to support the Health Board's kidney transplant service. We have run a number of pilots with a dietitian, physiotherapist, and input from an occupational therapist. 74 patients have completed the 8-week programme. We have clearly defined outcomes for the programme, ultimately looking to extend the longevity of the graft, for which there is a growing evidence base of the relationship between this and body weight. We may have to wait up to 15 years to get the result, not useful because we need to evaluate now, and the time delay would lead you to ask the question, is there any direct between this intervention and the ultimate outcome? Information is recorded on this sheet at each week of attendance from direct recording in the session. Biochemical results are manually extracted from patient records outside the session, which is time-consuming to collate the results. Even with this set of measures, each measure does not fit all subjects in the group, which consists of live organ recipients, pre- and post-transplantation, donors, and dialysis patients waiting for a transplant. This can lead to problems with results being skewed. A dialysis patient will never get an improved creatinine. Hernia affects waist circumference. Fluid balance affects weight. We have tried to collect quality of data for this group. We had a problem getting the correct fit for the patient cohort. However, patient feedback reports improvements generally in mood, perception of fitness, confidence, self-esteem, understanding of the relationship with food, and increased knowledge regarding nutrition and intake. The nice and rewarding aspect of measurement and spending all the time to record data for each of the patients is that it does give you some clear results that are easy to present and demonstrate the direct effectiveness of the approach. In our case, people lost weight and one of the goals achieved. This slide was collated from data from the first 2 pilots and looked at the BMI at the start and end point. I'm very happy to see that all but one of 34 actually reduced their BMI. And this has been part of the evidence base to support the case for investment in substantive funding. Here is another example, hot off the press. An audit carried out by my lead nutrition support dietitian, Amelia Dukes, in May, of which the results have just become available last week. We were one of 6 UK healthcare organisations participating in this audit out of a total of 179 that were submitted internationally. The results are based on data submitted for 26 patients. This has been a rewarding experience as we've been selected for further evaluation. As you can see from this one example slide, one of many of the data analysis from the overall benchmarking report, the Health Board seems to be clearly outperforming its sister organisations, although I have a question about the results at day 11. But just collecting the data was very challenging. It's time-consuming. It couldn't be done within the remit of the post holder's working day, and we are very reliant on the personal commitment of our staff. Also, the data had to be collected over a 24-hour period, which did not correlate with our collection period of midnight to midnight. It was compared to 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. required for the study. So work was required to collate the data across the 2 time periods. Collecting data is time-consuming and is very much dependent on the commitment of staff. I clearly cannot afford to carry out this exercise systematically across my full-service portfolio. So how do you evaluate the quality of nutritional care for the entire hospital population? We have abandoned the idea of systematically evaluating nutritional care for each patient from a measurement perspective as a whole, and concentrated on setting standards for the process of delivering nutritional care and concentrating on measuring that process. Our baseline is the All Wales Food and Fluid Standards, which set standards for calories, core nutrients, fluid volume, frequency of meals and snacks and drinks in every hospital in Wales. An all-meals hospital menu is being developed to sit behind this, and that has had significant input from patients. All evaluation and calculation of requirements is done against this. As a dietetic profession and nutrition nurses, we have worked hard with Welsh Government and nursing colleagues to standardise the terminology and currency used to record intake for both food and fluids on our All Wales Food and Fluid record charts. We have these for the adult settings, for adults in hospital settings. It has also been rolled out to the paediatric wards, and the examples I'm showing on this slide and the following are what we use in our care and nursing home environments. The standardisation of measurement allows the dietitian to correctly compare observations recorded by different staff for the same patient on the same chart, regardless of the ward, and it has made it easier for the clinician to calculate how well requirements are being met and to adjust the nutrition care plan accordingly. Not content with measuring at the process level, we are working through another measurement project, mapping the journey of acutely admitted medical patients through their admission to evaluate the impact of nutritional care against their eventual outcome and length of stay. This too requires backward tracking through notes after discharge. The project includes everybody with an admission nutrition risk score of high that comes through via our AAU. We have recorded data against a set range of nutritional parameters overlaid with patient-reported data and recorded patient stories of their experiences. We used interns to collect the information, not the clinical staff, and the results are currently being analysed. In summary, where does this leave us? Fundamentally, I need to collect data to help me evaluate the effectiveness of my services and to drive improvement and to answer the challenge. It's not easy to fit this into the demands of a clinician's working day. As a profession, we are still debating what the best measures are for each area of care, service offering and condition. Relatively speaking, evaluative measurement can best be achieved on a research basis outside the normal day-to-day business of calculating requirements, measuring intake and devising and adjusting a nutritional care plan. We all know that good nutrition drives better patient outcomes, but how do we demonstrate clearly whether better health drives better nutrition or better nutrition drives better health? Thank you.
If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Now, these are words that I live by as an information analyst, but it got me thinking, looking at it, and it's been mentioned before by Elsa, who first said this? And the earliest attribution I can find is this guy, Lord Kelvin, who is, prior to the advent of Brian Cox anyway, the closest thing we had to a celebrity physicist. He developed the Kelvin scale and was instrumental in laying cables across the transatlantic, and really could not understand how anybody could undertake anything without measuring it effectively. Without measurement, what do we rely on? Gut instinct? Oh, sorry, terrible pun. We rely on anecdote, we rely on personal opinion, we rely on individual thoughts and feelings, none of which gives us the real overarching story of where we want to go with our changes in service, with our improvement programmes and our ultimate ambitions and aspirations, which have been fantastically laid out by my co-speakers this morning. Having really good measurement can absolutely tell the story of your improvement journey, and I have to thank colleagues north of the border for this chart here at the bottom of the slide, which in a single graphic and a few annotations essentially tells the story of a 6-year improvement plan to reduce length of stay in an ICU. It takes a bit of looking at, and you're not going to be able to do it off a slide. But hopefully it illustrates to you just how powerful the simple act of measurement can be in telling your story, in really underpinning and conveying to people the message that good nutrition is an absolute must in the holistic delivery of all services. But obviously, when we come to measure nutrition, and Judith put this incredibly well in her presentation a moment ago, we've got an awful lot of challenges. Nutrition underpins all aspects of basic care across a huge range of care settings. It's not enough to define a single measure and then try and roll that out across that kind of breadth. It's never going to fit everybody. We're never going to have a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to measurement. Because good nutrition means different things in different settings, as you'll all know. The wider impact of nutrition, particularly in the community, is something that is quite nebulous. Nutrition isn't just about the gaining weight and the physical aspects of good care. It's also about the social aspects, and the development of a whole person, and measures around that are incredibly hard to conceptualise, let alone deliver. That doesn't mean that we can't give it a good go. So all of our measures and our measurement and the development of a measurement strategy at a national level or even a local level needs to reflect this multidimensional nature. And the real trick there is to try and do that without it becoming unwieldy and leaving you guys with a list of 100 measures to collect, boxes to tick, and therefore turning it into a kind of measurement for judgment exercise rather than one that we can use to underpin and tell our improvement, our improvement story. So what we've tried to do is develop initially a framework that takes some of these key aspects, these key challenges into account. So looking at different measures across different settings, looking at key areas of good nutrition, understanding that it's a multifaceted thing, and trying to build that into our strategy. And then absolutely crucially, having an improvement focus. Now, Elsa spoke earlier about using measures for judgment, big reports with red, amber and green traffic lights in. My background's in performance measurement. It feels quite uncomfortable. I'm a convert. But also kind of moving away from the measurement for research purposes, which obviously has an absolute place, but when we're talking about improvement, we can't wait 15 years to see whether or not our change, or whatever, our implementation of a new strategy or a new piece of guidance has actually made a difference. We need to know now. We need rapid cycle, continuous improvement, and then build that into the culture. In order to do that, then, we need to think about having a range of measures focusing on outcome, and I think the importance of having an outcome measure has been really well articulated this morning. But also understanding whether or not we've got our processes right, and then finally having some kind of measure of balance. So we may be improving the system here, but is that having an impact on the system in a different place that perhaps we hadn't expected? So taking all of these bits into account, we really want to kind of develop a framework that people can use in a really practical way. So the first step, and I'd just like to emphasise this is a developmental piece, is the development of a matrix, which basically has those three components within it. Now, I'm sure you won't be able to read this slide because it's far too small, but it's ended up being quite a big document. So on the column on the left, we've got key themes. So we've got the key themes that link into the work that BAPEN's done previously. So we've got themes around prevention of malnutrition, we've got themes around education, so on and so forth. And then we've got key indicators within that, indicator type. So outcome measure, where we can, process measures where we can, balancing measure again where we can. And then along the top, we've started to fill in the boxes, if you like, for each of our major care settings, so acute care, community care, patients within their own home, those kind of vulnerable unknowns that were mentioned earlier. And then obviously within primary care as well, kind of developing some of the work that our colleagues in general practice have undertaken. So we do end up with a pretty substantial kind of matrix of potential measures. So, but what do we do with this? So in terms of using that framework then, it's about having a menu, and that was a deliberate pun, sorry. A kind of menu concept. So, for example, if we took a GP practice who was with a particular interest in the identification and prevention of malnutrition, they could choose a set of measures from that matrix as their dashboard, if you like. They may want to look at utilisation of healthcare resources. Is this impacting on A&E attendances, referrals, so on and so forth? A measure of wellness, that's quite a nebulous concept, but we can come back to that. Patient feedback on the current quality of food, so on and so forth. So really kind of collecting a subset of measures from the matrix that is relevant to their particular setting, that is relevant to their improvement project. And then kind of building that into a dashboard and having it on a dashboard approach. Now, this is just an example of a dashboard, but I just wanted to briefly explain the concept and the power of having a dashboard approach to measures. First of all, this is all in graphical format. So when you're presenting information, having it in a graphical format rather than a whopping great table of numbers has a significant impact on what people take away from that and the message that it conveys. Judith showed that absolutely brilliantly earlier in her charts. I know nothing about those programs, but I'm able to see really quickly, really simply what the outcomes were. The second point about this kind of dashboard is that we've got 4 measures shown together. And the point that the real power of that is that we can then begin to see the interrelationships between them. So if we've got an outcome and a process and a balancing measure, if we've changed our process somehow and that's had a positive impact on the outcome, if we've got the balancing measure alongside, we can see whether or not it's had a negative impact there. And from that, again, we're building this picture, we're building this story. That kind of, obviously it's very much ongoing development. So we want to undertake some local testing of this menu concept in different settings. Is the menu varied enough? Does it cater to all settings? I didn't deliberately put all of these puns in, by the way, I promise. We also need kind of additional population of measures, valid measures that are tried and tested, and I guarantee that there are loads and loads that are out there in practice that haven't been harvested through this kind of process. We want to really create a central resource that not only helps to kind of raise the profile of measurement as a crucial aspect in the improvement of care, but also provide people with the tools to kind of take it away and start to measure their own services. Once we can develop that to a point where we can select measures at a range of kind of organisational levels, so it may start with team and then we can have an organisation and then a regional, we can start to think about national and regional dashboards that puts nutrition right there alongside some of the key outcome measures we've got in other areas of patient safety. That's quite a high level kind of approach to developing a menu or resource that people can access at the local level. But one of the things that I've heard from conversations with colleagues in the room and also this morning's presentations has been, firstly, that we're seriously lacking on the side of outcome measures, but also that we want something that enables us to measure quickly and with the patient participating. So we've started to develop, and again, it's quite nascent, early stages of development, a temperature check on the quality of nutritional care, and I also refer to it as a care thermometer. So I've said we're taking the temperature. And it's around a weighted score, and into that weighted score goes the ideas of getting the processes right, reviewing applicable outcomes, and then hearing the patient voice. We want a really simple tool that could be taken out and utilised alongside, next to patients, asking them the questions, talking to them and discussing their nutritional care with them, and kind of develop that to a point where it's really about measurement as part of the day-to-day and as part of the usual care process. We're currently undergoing kind of first tests for refining and working up the operational definitions. That's not going to be fun. And then eventually, long-term development, turn it into, again, a kind of centralised resource that everyone can use, a web-based collection and analytics, and then potentially cross-fingers information governance, allowing cross-tracking, cross-organisational tracking of patients between care settings. This is what it looks like at the moment. It's a bit of a mess in Excel, but hopefully, because we're at the test phase and it needs to be rapidly changed. But hopefully you can see that we've got 5 kind of core areas, so administrative information, organisation, ward setting, so on and so forth. Some demographic information, which includes the usual age and gender, but also some diagnostic bits, because obviously that has a significant impact on some of whether or not certain outcomes are applicable. Process measures around screening and care planning, outcome measures around weight, change in MUST score, and then crucially an experiential measure, which is still open to a bit of debate around the wording. But that's the bit that really puts the patient at the centre. How do you feel about your nutritional care? Is it working for you? What matters to you? Thanks, Steve. about your nutritional care and bringing that into the whole process. And then finally, a kind of weighted scoring thing at the end, so we do end up with a nice homogeneous number. As I said, this is at a very early stage, but we're looking for people who would be willing to test it in a range of settings. So I'm sure that there's a person they can speak to, or you can speak to if you want to get involved in that. I'm now 2 minutes and 27 seconds over time, so that's everything from me. Thank you very much.
So I hope this morning as we start our conference we have inspired some confidence in you that BAPEN at our 21st birthday is focusing very much on the right things. We are focusing on developing a national vision. We are focusing very much on placing the patient at the centre of care and listening to our patients and actually understanding what we need to do things differently in terms of measurement. So I just want to repeat the ask of all of you. We cannot do this work on our own. So when you go for coffee, will you please go via our map and actually put your name and contact details on it, and